Hello, dear students. This is Professor John Forsyth, and today I'm going to show you how to use the assert statement in Python. Okay, so the assert statement is useful for checking that your code is working the way it's supposed to. So this can be useful, for example, if you are reading a lot of text into your program, and maybe it takes a while for that text to completely finish processing. And so every time you need to check to see if your program is working the way it should, maybe it takes 5 seconds, and over time, like as you're changing your code, repeating that process, that can become really frustrating, and 5 seconds adds up, and just like pausing, waiting till you can see the output finally of your function. So asserts can, and I'm going to show you how, but they can help alleviate that problem. And it's a good basic skill to start learning for later on when you want to become a professional software developer, and if you get into software testing. So this is kind of basically an introduction to doing software testing. And there's other tools in Python that do this more robustly, more powerfully. But this is going to kind of guide you in, I would say, like a good, correct way in how to do software testing. So, and if that doesn't make sense, what's software testing? Well, you'll get a little taste of that as you watch this video. So there's something called the assert statement in Python. Okay, so the basic usage of the assert statement, you type the word assert, and then afterwards you have some type of expression that you want to assert the truth of it, the truth value. Is this true or false? Okay, so we could say that true equals false, which is clearly not true. And if I save that, I have an incorrect statement, or rather a false statement, and I play my code, and then down below here I'm going to get an assertion error. And it shows me in the red where the error is, okay? So here's the assertion error. So let's fix that and make it true. So we could say true is true, save that and execute it. And now I get nothing. This assertion error was the last time I executed before, but this time I executed here and it did nothing. So when the assert followed by the expression that you're asserting is true, then it shows you nothing. So it's kind of like a canary in the coal mine. It tells you, okay, is this true or not? And if it's not true, then it'll let you know that by throwing an error. Okay, so false equals false would also return true, because those two things are true and false. So you would probably want to use it more, like you'd be more likely you'd be using it with like numbers. I mean, you wouldn't obviously write like any of these explicit statements I'm writing, but we can use it with numbers. So we could assert that 1 equals 2, and we use the double equals because that's the comparison equals rather than assignment. And again, we get an assertion error, and it highlights where the problem is. Now we can also give us some additional information about the problem when we type our assert statement. There's an optional piece of text that we can put afterwards. So we can say 1 is clearly not equal to 2. Okay, and I'm obviously using like toy examples here, but I just want to show you step by step and build up your knowledge how to use the assert statement, and then we'll use it in something that's more realistic. So if we run this, we get an assertion error as we did before, but this time it has a nice descriptive message of what the problem is. 1 is clearly not equal to 2. Okay, so we have this optional comma followed by a string that shows what our problem is, or why we're getting the assert error, rather than just an assert error with no explanation. Now moving a little bit closer to a real example, or something that is a little more realistic. So let's say we have two variables where one is that, or we could say x is 1, for example, and y is 2. Okay, so those are our two variables. So now if we put our variables in here, and compare those, doing the same comparison of 1 compared to 2, or stating or asserting that they are equal when they are in fact not. I want to show you that you can use an F string here in your assert statement. So we can say that X is clearly not equal to Y, and I'm missing my, because I'm using the F string, so I can insert these values. That's the point of prefixing this F, a format string, so we can format our variables in here, insert them into this string. So now if we play this, we get a much even more clear example, and this did not work exactly as I expected it to. Actually, no, it did. Sorry, I'm looking up here at, it shows the code, that the line that we're having the problem, and then as you can see below, assertion error, and it actually prints what our values are that we're comparing. So 1 is clearly not equal to 2. Okay. Well, there we go. So we get a nice, even more detailed assertion error based on the specific values that I passed in. Okay. So there's our basic assertion. And I'm just going to make y equal to 1. So now this, again, will pass silently. So assert succeeds silently. There's no error because 1 equals 1. So I'll leave that there. So now let's talk about how we can actually use this to be useful as we're developing. So again, I use the analogy, it's a real analogy, especially when we're doing text processing, of as we develop our program, we want to test that it works. And it would be nice if we could test like little pieces of the function, or little pieces of the program, like individual functions, for example, to make sure they're working correctly, okay? So if you're in my class, we've worked with regular expressions, so I'm going to use some regular expressions, okay? Let's write a function, and before we do that though, let's write an assert statement, okay? So we want to get some input, and we want to get some test input. So let's say like we have Alice walks on the sidewalk. And we just want to check that check our inputs first. So that's what we're doing here. This one is a step that I personally, in my own coding style, I skip a lot. I usually don't do this part. The second one that I'll show is more common. So we just want to make some assertion about this input, okay, before we put it into our function. So we have some input, and we want to assert that the input, I don't know, has a string length that's longer than 5, for example, that the input the length of the input is greater than 5. Let's say, yeah, if it's not greater than 5, then it's not valid input. So let's make this shorter than 5 to start off. So I'm going to comment out this part. So you can put a comment on the same line. Okay, so now we just have AL for 2 characters of Alice. So the length of that is just going to be 2, and this assert will be false. And let's give ourselves a nice assertion message. The input needs to be greater than 5. Okay, so that should be our error message here if all goes well. And all did not go well because perhaps I'm misunderstanding how length works or forgetting. Let's try. Length is not defined. Okay, so it is len. Oh, this is what we want to do. I need to switch. Yeah, there we go. If you're watching at home, you probably saw that error. Okay, so I just needed to switch this. So I'm saying that 5 is less than the length because I want the length to be greater than 5. Yeah, so there we go. Just switch the sign there. Okay, so my length is not greater than 5. So the input needs to be greater than 5. There's my clear message. Okay. So let's fix this assert, and then we'll leave it in place. So I'll take out that, take out the comment, and now we have our longer string. And we play this, and both of our asserts, the one we did originally and down here on line 11, are now passing. I probably would have written this myself the other way around. That's why perhaps it was a little more confusing. This reads a little bit better. So the length of our string is greater than 5. Just double check that that still works, okay? So again, this is still kind of a toy example, but it's useful to understand. This next one I think is even more useful of how I'm going to check my function. And if I haven't said this clearly yet, part of the advantage of using this assert statements when we're testing a function and developing is you don't need to run all of your code across like a large file and wait for that file to be processed completely and you finally get your output. And if you can break your function or your whole program into individual functions that do specific jobs, you can test each one with an assert statement. And you can write the assert statement before. In fact, this is a really common programming practice to write a test or an assert before you actually write the function, in fact. So I could assert that we want to use some regular expression. So I'm creating the name of the function here before it even exists. So I'm going to say that my string contains the name Alice inside of it, okay? And then I'm going to pass that input. So I'm going to assert that this returns true or false, contains Alice. So that's my assert by itself. I don't need any double equals or greater than, because I'm expecting this function to return true or false, whether this input contains Alice, okay? And then I can say input does not contain Alice, okay? And again, this is my error message if this assertion fails. So if I play that, I'm going to get a name error. So it doesn't even give me the assertion error because this function does not exist yet. And I need to write the function before the use of it. So let's go ahead and write the function. And I'm going to do a very minimal. I'll use the word text here. So this input will be set equal to text when we use it. And I'm just going to write pass, which is a placeholder for coming back later to use to create the function. So at least I'll get past the name error. So because now the function actually exists. So this name contains Alice, the name of the function, it does exist. Okay, and this is a good way, especially when you're new at a particular project you're working on, to go baby steps. Like, okay, we'll write pass before we write all the complicated stuff and just make sure that things are working. Okay, so I do have an assertion error. Input does not contain Alice. This isn't exactly accurate because, well, it does contain Alice, but this didn't return true. It probably returned none implicitly, which is going to return false. So when we do that, in fact, I could check that. Let's see what is our return value. Assert contains Alice is none. Okay, that's one way you can check is none. It is not none. Okay, so I wrote an assert message statement to check this out. So text is not defined. Did you mean next? Oops, I meant input. Okay, so I'm just using input again. And notice my first assert did not fail because I explicitly returned a none. But if I want to check if that none gets returned implicitly, it does. I could say is not none. And now this gives me an error. I changed this, so now the statement is incorrect, is inaccurate, this text afterwards. But yeah, I was just showing you when you do pass, functions always implicitly return none if you don't return it specifically. But we want to return a true or false, and we're going to use regular expressions to do so. So let's import our RE, okay? And then let's say re.search, and we're going to search for Alice inside of our text. And so we're slowly getting where we need to be. Okay, so I forgot to do return. Okay, so now we're returning something that's a search result. It'll either be none or a match object. Match will evaluate to true. So for all intents and purposes, this will tell us true or false if it contains Alice. But notice it says input does not contain Alice because I did lowercase. Okay, so this is just I'm doing this on purpose to just show you iteratively how you can continue to rely upon this assert statement to get closer to the goal of making this function work the way it should. Okay, so we notice that, and actually I can use my f string here again. And because I'm doing a test, I'm just using a small piece of text. So it's not too crazy to just go ahead and print this out in an f string or include that. So there is, now it says input does not contain Alice. So now it's a little bit more clear. It says Alice walks on the sidewalk does not contain Alice. Okay, well it does, but now I can clearly see that it doesn't contain lowercase Alice, but it does contain uppercase Alice. So let's go ahead and change this to be case insensitive. So you can do re dot ignore case. It's a third potential argument, optional argument to pass to your RE functions, including search, and it will make the match be case insensitive. So this matches lower or uppercase A as well as the rest of the letters. Okay, so now that succeeded. So my assert no longer does the error. Okay, so if I'm going along and maybe I decide, oh, you know what, I want to update this code a little bit, and just maybe slightly change my regular expression pattern, something like that. I could, say, oh, I want to match Bill instead, and then I play this, and then I'm going to get an error. And one other way I could change this, so the last thing I just said, what I mean to illustrate there is that this, by leaving the assert statement in here, it keeps your code safe from having what's called a regression. So it goes back and it stops working when it was working before. So by modifying your code, and having several assert statements can help with that and make it really nice. One other way we can make this maybe a little bit nicer is have two arguments and have like our pattern and our, so our pattern goes here that we're matching, and our text inside the text. So now we can say our pattern is going to be an R string of Alice, and go ahead and put in our let's call it pattern here. Okay, so now we pass that in as a variable, my pattern. So the input does not contain pattern. That's what I want my error message to say. And if I change that pattern to be Bill, for example, then here's how I can see Alice walks on the sidewalk does not contain Bill. Okay, so just by simply changing this value here, I could make the function not work as expected. So that could be a nice way to just ensure that works. Based on the fact that I named this function contains Alice, I'd probably want to hard code that pattern rather than, this is called hard coding when you write it explicitly rather than using a variable. So yeah, based on that, I wouldn't want it to potentially take Bill. So for the design of this particular function, I would stay with this pattern and something like that. So there you go. Our assert now does not pass because we are, let's see, why is it not passing? Because we have two arguments here still. Two required arguments. So revise that function, and now all the asserts pass. There's no assert error. So hopefully that was helpful. And this is required for the final project if you're in my course to use assert statements in your code to check the input and output of your functions. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.